Chapter 16 notes. This is the beginning of Key Concept 5. So we're going to start with a few topics, 1 through 6. Slavery in the South will be Roman numeral 1. Southern society, number 2. Problems of slavery in the social system, Roman numeral 3. Treatment of slaves, Roman numeral 4. The abolitionist movement, number 5. And Roman numeral 6, the basis and results of Southern opposition. Let's begin with Roman numeral 1, slavery in the South. Now, first thing I got here are quotes. And these are historians. And here's Blum. What's he say? What gave the Old South its special identity? Not physical isolation, not a difference in population origin, not contrasts in religious and political philosophy. Not even the economics of the North and South were altogether dissimilar. Few Southern farmers benefited from the national market economy. Wealth was less evenly distributed. Less money was invested in education. Fewer towns and industry developed. But all of these were of secondary importance. By far, the most significant difference was the presence and survival in the South of slavery. Ralph Waldo Emerson, quote, "If you put a chain around the neck of a slave, the other end fastens itself around your own." By the 1790s, slavery was considered a dying institution. It was going out of business. It was losing money. It was considered the peculiar institution evolving from a necessary evil, still considered not a good thing. Then you have in 1793 Eli Whitney inventing the cotton gin. This makes cotton vastly profitable. Take a look at my SFI. 1800, 7% of exports. By 1860, 57% of all of the United States exports. You should be thinking 2 words right now. 2 words. And this is how you describe all of what I just said. And you ready? There's my graphs. This is King Cotton. Cotton was king. So whenever you're talking about cotton during this antebellum period, refer to it as King Cotton. And here's my SFI to prove it. As cotton production goes up, slave population increases. Surprise, surprise. 80% of the cotton used by Britain came from the South. Cotton was king. Now, these increasing demands by these textile factories, how do they meet them? First, we get a development of a different type of cotton. Short staple cotton replaces long staple cotton, increases the area in which cotton could be profitably grown. So now you could grow it in different places. It could move west. Extension of this cotton growing regions westward happened because you used up the land. So you use up the land and then you just keep moving west. This is called soil butchery. Now, expansion of slavery, it had been banned since 1808. The Constitution, just to prove that it was about to die, the Constitution allowed future Congress to ban slave trade, importing of slaves, as soon as 1808. Not any sooner, but once 1808 hit, they were allowed to do it anytime afterwards. Some excellent SFI to prove that slavery is on its way out is they made bringing in slaves illegal in 1808. As soon as they were allowed to, they did it. There was no huge debate. It was done. Now, I will say, slave trade was carried on through 1860 illegally, but frankly, 50,000 at the most. Thus, the expansion of slavery was a natural increase more than a whole bunch of importing. And thus, also, slave breeding will become very profitable, especially in areas like Maryland, where soil butchery had destroyed their soil. So this was the next industry. All right, let's go to Southern society. I got 4 major categories: planter aristocracy, various levels of successful slaveholders. 3/4 of all Southerners owned no slave. And why did they support slavery? Well, first, let's look at the planter aristocracy. Come on. This was the power base. This is where the money was. This is where the power was. This is where the political decisions were made. By 1850, only 10 years before the Civil War is about to start, only 254 people owned more than 200 slaves. Come on. Planter estates of the elite ranged from 1,000 to 2,000 acres. Though few in number, they did rule Southern society. Take a look. 100 or more, 1,733. That's it. So there weren't huge amounts of slaveholders in the South. Matter of fact, 3/4 of all Southerners owned no slave at all. These were yeomen or subsistence farmers. They made up 10% of the white population. Why did they support the slave system? Well, we got two theories on this. Number one is the American Dream Syndrome. Basically, someday I might be a slave owner too. And number two, every group who's at the bottom loves to kick around somebody else below them. Nobody wants to be at the bottom rung. And so, okay, I'm a poor farmer, yeoman farmer, subsistence farmer in the South. Well, at least I'm not a black slave. And so those were the two theories on why they would be so energetic in their support of this slave system. All right. What are the problems of slavery and the social system? First off, public education will not be fostered because the elite don't need it. They run the government. Why should they have education? They privately educate their kids, so they don't want public education. Another problem of slavery in the social system is soil butchery. This cultivating the same soil over and over again without feeding it will destroy Virginia, Maryland, even a lot of North Carolina soil will get crushed due to this soil butchery. One crop economy is susceptible to price fluctuations. So this leads to financial instability. If all of a sudden, if you make oil right now, you're not making much money because gas prices are so low. If you are just got all your eggs in one basket, this really makes you susceptible to wild fluctuations in prices. Constant overspeculation in Western lands and costs of slaves. By 1860, the South had $2 billion invested in slaves. And estimated that 8 to 13% of the African Americans in the South were fathered by whites. There's pretty much a little cream in the coffee of most African Americans due to rape and other not good things, that's for sure. All right, so let's go straight from that to the treatment of slaves. Why would they be generally well treated? Well, it's kind of like your work truck, and I hate to look at it that way, but that's how the Southerners at the time did. Do you want to abuse your work truck? Now, I'm going to tell you, there were plenty of examples of abusive behavior. And frankly, the deeper the South you went, the worse it got, for generally. Slaves were given subsistence type of life, barely enough to survive. For example, kids under 10 were given one set of clothes for the whole year. So you knew when it's about clothing time because all the kids were running around naked. Come on, kids under 10 years old, one set of clothes, that's not going to last long. Their work day was from sunup to sundown. 6 days a week. That seventh day, that was theirs. Now, how they did work could be in one of two ways. You could be under the task system or the gang system. The task system, they said, okay, at sunup, go fill 50 bushels of cotton and don't quit until it's done. Whereas the gang system, you brought them all out to the fields and you said, start picking cotton. So the gang systems forced the slaves to work until the owners said they were finished and allowed them almost no freedom. So obviously the slaves much more preferred the task system. Now the slaves, to supplement their food, were encouraged to grow their own gardens, thus making it cheaper to have to feed them. Were there uprisings? Yes, plenty of uprisings. None very successful, except for maybe Haiti and Armistad, maybe, because, frankly, they're surrounded by slaveholders. It was just nowhere to run. Very difficult. So let's take a look at the slave uprisings. First one, we're only going to look at some of the more larger, more famous ones. You don't have to know them all. But let's start in 1800 with Prosper's Rebellion. It's going to be stopped before it starts. Word gets out. What's important is the results of it. The whites freak out. You know, you have certain areas where there's more slaves than white people. Now he calls on attack on Richmond, in which the slaves would seize the arsenal and kill all white people. Well, except some who were friendly to African Americans, like Quakers, Methodists, and Frenchmen. Now, the result would be strict new slaves codes enacted, where they really watched what they were allowed to do. They wouldn't be able to do things like meet or go to hire themselves out to another farm, because thus they could interact and plan. Denmark Vesey had a similar experience. God tells them to kill white people. They will be caught before their plan is off. A whole bunch will be hung, and a whole bunch of new slave codes. The most notable of the slave rebellions in the United States was Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. Nat Turner, a very religious, very intelligent slave, he would come to believe that God told him to kill all white people, and he just needed to wait for a sign. With a solar eclipse, he declares that his sign, and he goes out to kill. Now, he's supposed to kill them with their own weapons, so being very difficult to get muskets, and it would be very quickly discovered you took them. Many were killed with machetes and clubs and knives. It was very vicious, very bloody, and a lot of the victims were women and children. In return, a lot of blacks were killed who had nothing to do with the rebellion. It was just out of revenge. And again, what do we get? That theme of black codes, restricting education, freedom of movement, just basically getting in groups any kind of freedom. And this included freedmen too. Because again, who would be the leader of a slave revolt other than a freedman or a preacher? And let's take a look at some of the more important revolts I got listed here. And if you really want to go into the land of five, research these. They're kind of interesting. I got here, just click on Stono Rebellion link. You had to know this for Louisiana Purchase, the Haitian Revolution under Toussaint Louverture. We just did Prosper's and Vesey's Revolution and Nat Turner. You might have seen the movie Amistad. Of course, that's off the Cuba coast. And we're going to be looking at John Brown's raid later on at Harper's Ferry. Slavery was a degrading institution, and I know what you're thinking right now. You're like, duh. Lack of freedom, limited ability to advance. You know, there was no hope to go farther in life. And slave trade auctions may be the most brutal symbol of all. I mean, can you imagine holding up a baby and auctioning it? It's hard to even imagine. Just ripping apart the families might have been the most devastating thing of all in slavery. Don't think just because they were free that they didn't see a whole bunch of discrimination. It wasn't much better being a free black than being a slave, as in the treatment and discrimination. Your author's contention in your textbook, Bailey, says, quote, Southerners like blacks as individuals, but despise the race. Northerners profess to like the race, but despise the individuals. Why? I love this quote. It really gives you an insight into macro and micro attitudes towards slavery. Now, if you take a look at the Southern slaves, who was raising the children of these large aristocratic